Her father was murdered. Her mother lost her mind. At just 7 years old, Bimbo was thrown to the streets, and one encounter with a prostitute would change everything. Grab your popcorn, relax, and enjoy this story of bravery and resilience. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This is Tales from Motherland. Bimbo's early life was filled with love and warmth. She was the only daughter of Mr. Adebola, a highly respected auditor, and her mother, a driven woman who ran a successful frozen food business. Bimbo's mother, despite the struggles of being a small business owner, had built a reputation in Aguda for selling quality frozen foods, especially chicken, which she imported directly from Cotonou in Benin Republic. Life at home was peaceful, and Bimbo never wanted for anything. She remembered her parents' laughter in the evenings as they sat together at the dinner table, discussing their day. Her father would tell her stories of his work, how he was trusted to uncover fraud in companies and hold powerful people accountable. It was clear to her that he was proud of his work. Her mother, with her entrepreneurial spirit, had taught her the value of hard work and perseverance. Bimbo had always felt safe in their care, believing she would forever be surrounded by love. But one fateful evening, when Bimbo was only 6 years old, everything began to shift. It was a typical night, with the family gathered for dinner, when she overheard her parents having a heated argument in the other room. Her father's voice, usually calm, was now sharp with frustration. "I won't allow it to slide. I've detected the corruption. The culprits must be brought to book," he said, his words ringing with righteousness. Her mother, sounding fearful, replied, "Please, my dear, tread carefully. These people are dangerous." Bimbo's young mind couldn't grasp the gravity of their words, but the unease in her mother's voice haunted her. Her father continued, his tone unwavering, "I'd rather die than let them get away with this." The next morning, Bimbo's life changed forever. The company her father had been investigating, Noble Oil, had tried to bribe him with 10 million naira, offering him money to look the other way. But Mr. Adebola refused. He knew it was his duty to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. Soon, the threats escalated. That Sunday, strangers entered their church, and her father, sensing danger, tried to flee. But it was too late. He was shot dead in cold blood. Bimbo's world shattered. Her once vibrant home was now filled with mourning, and her mother, unable to cope with the loss of her husband, spiraled into a deep depression.
The days after her father's death felt like a blur. Bimbo's mother, overcome with grief, became unable to function. The business that had once flourished began to collapse, and within months she had taken loan from friends and investors to save her dying business, but unfortunately her goods were seized by the Nigerian customs. She was in serious debt. She sold all she had. In the process, their house was lost. She couldn't bear the loss. She couldn't come to terms with how things degenerated so fast. She was later admitted to the Yaba psychiatric hospital. Bimbo, at the tender age of 7, was forced to grow up too quickly. She found herself alone, struggling to care for her younger brother, Kalade, who was only 3 years old. With her mother in the hospital, Bimbo became the caretaker of the family, though she was just a child herself. She began selling bread. She will go get bread from a nearby bakery and pay after selling them off and taking her gain. With that, she was able to cater for herself, her brother, and her sick mother. Life struggles made her grow up very fast. The bakery was located next to a brothel, and it was there that Bimbo encountered the harsh reality of the world. It was in this dark environment that she met Vivi, a prostitute who was surprisingly kind to Bimbo. Bimbo supplied Vivi and her friends bread for breakfast daily. Vivi was amazed at how smart and dynamic she was at that age. Vivi was touched and decided to help despite her own life of hardship. Bimbo was drawn to her, though she didn't fully understand the kind of life Vivi led. She nicknamed her Smalley. Vivi helped her with money to feed and even assisted her at times to do her assignments. It was more as if Vivi had adopted her and her brother. She took good care of them. Soon Bimbo and her brother started calling her Mummy Vivi. One day at school, Bimbo was in a heated argument with a classmate over a pen, when she insulted her that, "Look at you, the common daughter of a prostitute." Even though Bimbo didn't know the meaning, she felt very bad. Later, she realized that a prostitute was someone who sold her body for money. The evening, she looked so sad and withdrawn. Then Vivi asked her, "Smalley, what is wrong with you? You are just keeping to yourself today." Then she looked at Vivi and asked, "Mommy Vivi, are you a prostitute?" The question took her unawares. "Where did you hear that from?" "My friend in school called me daughter of a prostitute," Bimbo replied. Vivi was lost in thought. That evening, she shared her tragic story. She spoke of a man she had once loved called Jerry. She loved him with her heart, body, and school. She said then she was into hair making, and she even had a very big saloon in Uyo, until Jerry came up with the idea of traveling abroad. He promised to return after a year to take her so they could get married. She sold her saloon and even emptied her savings for Jerry to travel abroad. She was so excited at the idea of she traveling abroad and getting married to Jerry in a year's time. At first, they communicated so well, but all that faded out gradually until she could no longer reach him again. It was in that confused state she realized she was pregnant. When he abandoned her, pregnant and alone, Vivi tried to abort the pregnancy, but the procedure had left her unable to have children of her own ever again. It was as if old wounds were reopened that night, and they both cried together. Vivi told Bimbo that she understood what it felt like to lose everything, to feel like the world had no room for you. But through it all, Vivi had learned to survive, and she passed that lesson on to Bimbo. The bond between them grew, and Bimbo began to see Vivi as a protector, someone who cared about her when no one else did.
Despite the harshness of her circumstances, Bimbo excelled in school. She clung to her studies like a lifeline, as though each lesson, each page of her worn textbooks could pull her further away from the cold reality of her life. Her handwriting was neat, her reading flawless, and her mind sharp enough to impress even the strictest teachers. Vivi noticed this early on. She would often tease her. "Smalley, with this your sharp brain, you will soon leave all of us here behind. Don't go and forget me, oh." Bimbo would laugh shyly, but deep down, she believed her dreams could never stretch beyond the bakery and the dim corridors of the brothel. Still, she studied every night by candlelight after putting Colade to bed, scribbling down notes with determination far beyond her years. One afternoon after school, Bimbo returned to the bakery only to find Vivi standing outside, arguing with a tall, aggressive man who reeked of alcohol. His voice was raised, his hands gesturing wildly. Bimbo froze, clutching Colade's small hand. She could hear the man accusing Vivi of owing him money. Without thinking, she stepped forward and tugged at Vivi's. "Mummy Vivi, please, let's go inside," she said quietly. The man turned his glare toward Bimbo, and for a moment she thought he might lash out. But Vivi placed herself between them, her voice suddenly cold and sharp. "If you touch her, you'll regret it." The man spat on the ground and stormed away, muttering curses. Later that night, Vivi explained that the man was a pimp she had refused to work for. "Smalley, this world will try to swallow you if you let it. You must learn when to fight and when to walk away." From then on, Bimbo began to see Vivi not only as a friend, but as a shield, someone who understood danger and could navigate it with a mix of courage and cunning. Over time, their bond deepened in small, everyday moments. Vivi would braid Bimbo's hair in the evenings, humming old Efik folk songs. On Saturdays, she taught her how to bargain in the market, showing her how to smile at some sellers and stand her ground with others. Sometimes when business was slow, Vivi would sit on the bakery steps with Bimbo, sharing roasted groundnuts and telling stories about her childhood in Uboyo, how she and her cousins would swim in the river until sunset, or how her grandmother's kitchen always smelled of pepper soup. But the brothel was still a dangerous place. One rainy night, Bimbo returned from the bakery to find a group of women shouting in Vivi's room. The air was thick with the smell of cheap gin, and in the middle of the chaos, she saw one of the women holding a bottle with liquid that smelled strange. Bimbo's instincts kicked in. She darted forward, grabbed Vivi's hand, and pulled her out into the corridor. Seconds later, there was a commotion in the room. One of the women had poured the contents into Vivi's drink, hoping to harm her. That night, Vivi held Bimbo tightly. "Smalley, you don't even know you saved my life." Her voice cracked, and for a rare moment, Vivi cried openly. From that day forward, Vivi's affection for Bimbo became fiercer. She began to call her "my daughter" without hesitation, and she vowed silently to do everything in her power to help the girl escape the life she herself had been trapped in. Years passed, and the small girl who had once carried trays of bread through the narrow streets was now a confident young woman. Bimbo's academic record was impeccable. She had consistently topped her class in secondary school, winning local essay competitions and earning the admiration of her teachers. One day, the principal called her into the office with unexpected news. She had been shortlisted for a scholarship to study abroad. The program was competitive, open to only a handful of students across the state. When Bimbo read the letter, her hands trembled. She could hardly believe that someone like her, who had grown up selling bread outside a brothel, might have the chance to attend a prestigious university in another country. But telling Vivi was the hardest part. That evening, she found her sitting outside, braiding another woman's hair by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. Bimbo handed her the letter silently. Vivi read it slowly, her face unreadable. Then she looked up, her eyes glistening. "Smalley, I told you you're going to leave here one day," she said softly. The days that followed were a mix of excitement and dread. Bimbo knew that accepting the scholarship would mean leaving Vivi and Koladi behind. She worried about who would care for her brother, though Vivi promised to keep an eye on him. A week before her departure, Vivi surprised Bimbo with a small envelope. Inside was a faded gold chain with a tiny pendant in the shape of a dove. "This was my mother's," she explained. "It's the only thing I have from her. Keep it close. Whenever you feel lost, touch it, and remember, you can fly anywhere you want to." The night before Bimbo left, they sat together outside the bakery. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of generators and the occasional bark of a stray dog. Vivi spoke in a low voice. "When you get there, you will see a new world. Don't be afraid of it, but don't ever forget this one. You survived here. That means you can survive anywhere." On the day of her departure, Vivi and Kolade walked her to the bus station. Vivi squeezed her hand so tightly it hurt. "Go, Smalley. Make me proud." As the bus pulled away, Bimbo pressed her forehead against the window, watching Vivi's figure grow smaller. Her chest ached, but beneath the sadness was a fierce determination. She would make it. She would prove to herself and to Vivi that all their sacrifices had been worth it. Bimbo arrived in her new country, overwhelmed by the changes. The language was different, the food was unfamiliar, and the culture was nothing like what she had known. She missed her mother and Vivi more than she had imagined, but she knew she had to focus on her studies. She worked part-time jobs to support herself, studying late into the night. The loneliness weighed heavily on her. She had no family, no one to confide in. Yet her dreams of a better life kept her going. She excelled in her studies, impressing her professors with her determination. But in the quiet moments, when she lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't help but wonder where Vivi was. She hadn't heard from her since she left. As the months passed, Bimbo's attempts to contact Vivi were met with silence. She sent letters and emails, but there was no response. The absence of Vivi's comforting voice in her life left a hole in Bimbo's heart. She felt more alone than ever. Despite her academic success and the offer of a mouth-watering job, she longed to hear from the one person who had shaped her life so profoundly. Then, the news from home came. Her mother's condition had worsened, and Bimbo knew that it was time to return. She had always planned to go back and take care of her, but now it felt like she had unfinished business. What had happened to Vivi? Why had she disappeared? Returning to Nigeria, Bimbo was greeted with the familiar chaos of her past. Her mother's mental state had deteriorated, and she was now living in a more advanced psychiatric facility. But she could see glimpses of the woman her mother had once been, the woman who had built a thriving business and cared for her family with strength. Bimbo resumed her search for Vivi, asking anyone who might know where she had gone. She was anxious to find her, to share the good news of her recent achievements with her. She visited the old bakery, hoping to find some trace of her, but the brothel was closed and no one knew where she had gone. Finally, she heard rumors that Vivi had returned to her village in Akwa Ibom. Determined to find her, Bimbo set off on a journey across the country. Bimbo's journey to Akwa Ibom was long and exhausting, but she refused to give up. She asked around, but no one seemed to know where she had gone. Weeks passed before she finally found her, lying in a small hospital, frail and weak. Vivi, who had once been full of life, was now barely recognizable. Vivi had contracted AIDS, and the illness had taken its toll on her, but when she saw Bimbo, her face lit up with pride. "You did it," Vivi whispered. "I knew you could." As Bimbo sat by Vivi's bedside, she listened to the old woman's final words, words of love, encouragement, and hope. Vivi died in Bimbo's arms. Bimbo wept bitterly. "She sacrificed all for me, and now that I have come to pay her back, she decided to leave," she murmured under her breath. Bimbo's journey had been one of heartache, loss, and triumph. She had faced unimaginable hardships, but through it all, she had remained strong. With Vivi's teachings in her heart, she began to use her education to help others, particularly women who had faced the same struggles. Through her foundation, Bimbo provided resources and support to young girls, offering them a chance at a better life. She never forgot the sacrifices Vivi had made for her, and she worked every day to honor that memory. Bimbo visited the graveside of Vivi before she traveled back abroad.
"Mommy Vivi, I have come to tell you that I am going back. It truly hurts that you are not here to share in my wins, the same wins you always prayed for. Thank you for sacrificing everything for me, even when it wasn't convenient. Thank you for teaching me all I know. Your Smalley will forever be grateful. They called you a prostitute, but you will forever be my hero."